In a world ravaged by a pandemic, where society has crumbled and humanity is pushed to the brink, emerges a story that transcends the very medium of video games itself. Welcome to The Last of Us, a title that redefined expectations for storytelling in games with its profound narrative and emotional depth. Released by Naughty Dog in 2013, this game not only explored the dark recesses of human nature, but also illuminated the enduring power of hope and connection. Join us today as we venture into the post-apocalyptic landscapes of The Last of Us and learn all about the inspirations that brought it to life as we take a look at the career of its creator, Neil Druckmann. It's a tale of heartbreak and redemption, beautifully interwoven with action, suspense, and a hauntingly realistic portrayal of a world undone. Strap in as today's episode explores one of the greatest video game stories ever written. And join us for today's harrowing trip down memory card lane. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. I hope these words find you well. Hello and welcome to the 198th episode of our Video Game History Podcast, A Trip Down Memory Card Lane. Each week, we'll tell you a story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game or the people that created it. It can be about a console or the technology that have brought it to life. We often talk about the companies that bring it all together, making our hobby video gaming a reality. While telling you each story, we hope to teach you something new about the topic, what it took from the world as its inspiration, or what it gave back to the world in its legacy. Today, we are diving into The Last of Us, a game that not only captured the imaginations of players around the world, but also set a new standard for storytelling in video games when it was released. The game offers a profound narrative journey through post-apocalyptic America, marked by poignant character development and immersive gameplay. I'm David Casson, and as always, I'm joined by my co-host, who's been practicing his stealth skills for the apocalypse. He's my brother, Rob Casson. Rob, has anything caught you off guard lately?
A beamer used its turn signals.
Did you mark the day on the calendar?
I sure did. I was so surprised.
I didn't even know that they had turn signals. Well, that's not true. Don't the new ones automatically utilize their turn signals?
I don't know anything about BMW, Dave. Come on.
Yeah,
That's fancy
I
cars.
think in the new ones they had to automatically do it, like it assumes where you're going and then automatically does it because they realized that was the only way that they were going to get any of their drivers. I don't know if that's true. I just had to set up that joke.
Oh, that would be hilarious. Oh, goodness gracious.
Oh, BMW drivers are the worst.
Amongst them, yes.
Yeah. I don't know. I get to live in the land of big trucks, so they're fantastic.
Sure.
So tell us what today we're going to be talking about The Last of Us, but certainly there are other things that have happened during this week in gaming history. What would some of those things be?
Well, kicking it off on June 12th, 1984, Nintendo released Hogan's Alley, one of the first light gun shooting games for the Nintendo Entertainment System. Utilizing the Zapper, players aim and fire at various targets in a simulated urban combat setting. The game features 3 story modes: a straightforward shooting range with cardboard cutouts of criminals and innocent bystanders that players must shoot or avoid shooting, respectively, a mode where cutouts pop up against the backdrop of a city street, and a trick shot mode where players shoot cans into designated areas to score points. Hogan's Alley was notable for its early use of light gun technology, providing an engaging and interactive experience that helped popularize shooting games on home consoles. Its influence extends into various shooting simulations and training applications beyond entertainment.
It's funny because you talk about those three modes and they sound so like straightforward and simple, right? There's a shooting range, there's a city mode, there's a trick shot mode. And I remember, because Hogan's Alley would have, I mean, I would have played it as an absolute child. It would have been one of my earlier games. I remember how like revolutionary and exciting it was to have a light gun and be able to shoot at the screen. Like, and now it's like, hmm, I just it's just weird to think about that. Like, I know we talk about it all the time, but sometimes it really hits me when you were like, there are three modes, and I'm like, God, that sounds so simple. But when I was a kid, that was the most exciting thing ever.
Yeah, but
So,
Dave, you still get excited for stuff like that.
I do still get excited for stuff like that. You are 100% correct in that.
So there you go. It's still
Yeah,
exciting. It's
yeah,
just not your everyday.
yeah. Well, now we have VR, so the concept's a little different. So,
I
I've
meant
had.
Time Crisis.
Oh, Time Crisis is awesome. I love Time
See? Point
Crisis.
proven. What do? You point a gun at a screen.
And then you take your foot off the pedal and duck.
Yeah, that's the only difference.
I love Time Crisis. All right, what else you
Fantastic
got?
game. Well, on June 15th, 1987, Nintendo expanded its innovative Game & Watch series with the release of Bomb Sweeper. This handheld game was part of the multi-screen series, featuring two LCD screens stacked vertically, similar to the design of the Nintendo DS introduced much later. In Bomb Sweeper, players navigate through a maze to defuse bombs within a time limit, requiring strategic thinking and quick reflexes. The gameplay involved moving through the maze's corridors to reach and disarm bombs, all while avoiding dead ends and retracing steps to exit safely after the bomb is defused. Bomb Sweeper offered engaging and challenging puzzle gameplay, adding a unique and memorable experience to the Game & Watch lineup that continued to showcase Nintendo's creativity in game design during the early years of handheld gaming.
There were early years of handheld gaming. I'm just kidding. The Game
I'm
and Watch.
actually shocked that there was a dual screen way back then.
Yeah,
That's pretty sweet, man.
I mean they were bits and pieces, right? They were doing bits and pieces of it. Uh, the technology. Remember that Game and Watch was a Gunpei Yokoi deal, right? He was the handheld guy. He started with the Game and Watch, eventually made the Game Boy, and that translated into other things. And his whole design philosophy wasn't it something like finding new things in old, like moving forward with old things? Do you remember he had this weird saying that we were like, what was that? His
You
design
know,
philosophy?
yeah, I do recall that there was something, but if you wanted to ask me to recite what it was, I am the wrong person to ask on that.
It's all right. I had to look it up. It's lateral thinking with withered technology, which
That's
is
it.
which is like they were finding things that already existed that were cheap, right? And finding new ways to use them. So, in the case of Game and Watch, just to briefly give it, they were competing with the digital calculator market, and the calculator market was popular. So, there was all these overabundance of liquid crystal displays and semiconductors. So, they turned them into a video game line called Game and Watch. So, there you go.
Very fun random history.
Yeah, I know. We haven't done a Game and Watch episode, but we will.
Yes, we shall.
Moving on.
Speaking of handheld gaming, on June 14th, 1989, Tetris was released on the Nintendo Game Boy, becoming one of the most iconic and influential video games of all time. Developed originally by Soviet software engineer Alexei Pajitnov in 1984, the game found its way to the Game Boy and helped to catapult the handheld console to massive success. For those that don't know, Tetris is a tile matching puzzle game where players rotate and arrange falling tetrominoes.
hmm
Wow, that's a hard word.
It's a great word.
Uh, so players rotate and arrange falling tetrominoes to complete horizontal lines, which then disappear to free up space for more pieces. Its simple yet addictive gameplay made it a universal hit, appealing to a broad demographic of players. The Game Boy version's portability and the inclusion of Tetris as a pack in game were significant factors in the system's global success, solidifying Tetris' status as a staple in the puzzle game genre and and a cultural phenomenon. And we did an episode 93, so if you want to learn more about Tetris, go give it a listen.
Really fascinating story. Do you remember how long it took before he saw a cent of money from his game, one of the most popular games of all time?
I could not tell you, Dave, but I'm sure it was a crazy amount of time if we had to talk
Yeah,
about it.
20, like I think almost 30 years, if not more. It wasn't until the 2000s that he actually got to see money because he developed it under the Soviet Union. And under communism, the government owned everything. And it wasn't until the USSR dissolved and they sorted out that mess that he was able to get control of the game, create a company, and start making money off of it.
That's a hell of a long time, but hey, it's obviously still popular enough that he was making money.
Still is.
Next up, on June 10th, 2011, Duke Nukem Forever was released after one of the most notoriously prolonged developments in video game history. Initially announced in 1997, the game was developed by 3D Realms and later finished by Gearbox Software, finally being published by 2K Games. As a sequel to the 96 game Duke Nukem 3D, Duke Nukem Forever continued the adventures of the titular character, Duke Nukem, in his quest to save Earth from alien invaders. Despite its lengthy production cycle, the game received mixed to negative reviews upon release, criticized for dated graphics, clunky mechanics, and off color humor that many felt hadn't aged well with modern gaming sensibilities. However, it still retained a cult following due to its iconic protagonist and nostalgic appeal for fans of the series.
Yeah. Also, we were really curious about one of the games that at the time was like the longest development cycle on the face of the earth. So,
And now games are just in pre release forever.
now games are just in pre-release forever. They didn't do that back then. They we didn't see the game at all from 97 until 2011. Like the joke whenever a game was announced and you didn't think it would ever come out was that it was just going to be a Duke Nukem Forever. So we
Now
did
Half Life
we
3.
now Half-Life 3. We did an episode on Duke Nukem 3D back like the 20s, 21, 22 somewhere in there. And so if you want to learn about Duke Nukem 3D, you played Duke Nukem 3D,
I sure did.
and we talked about whether or not a game like that would be successful in today's culture, which I think it maybe would be,
Well,
honestly.
listen to Dave's former thoughts and see if he agreed
Let's see if it
back then.
changed. I probably said back then it would never survive
Probably.
because that was 3 years ago.
Crazy to think.
I know.
Whew.
Woo.
Next up on our Week in Gaming History, on June 14th, 2011, Alice Madness Returns was released, serving as a sequel to the cult classic American McGee's Alice. Developed by Spicy Horse and published by Electronic Arts, the game continues the dark and twisted reinterpretation of Lewis Carroll's famous Alice's Adventures in Wonderland. Set years after the events of the first game, Alice Liddell, traumatized and struggling with her past, delves back into a more macabre and sinister version of Wonderland. The game combines platforming, puzzle solving, and combat elements, with Alice wielding a variety of imaginative weapons, from the vorpal blade to the teapot cannon. Praised for its artistic design and imaginative world building, Alice Madness Returns offers a psychologically intense journey through a visually stunning and deeply disturbing Wonderland, exploring themes of trauma and recovery.
Trauma and recovery.
Indeed.
Uh, those were fantastic games. American McGee games were cool. He is just retired now. Hasn't done anything in a long time. I have a friend who's a fan. You know who you are. Wink, wink. So moving
Winkety
on.
dink.
Winkety dink.
And for our final Week in Gaming History subject, on June 15th, 2018, Among Us was released by the indie game studio Innersloth. Although it initially launched with little fanfare, the game gained an explosive increase in popularity in 2020 due to various streamers and YouTubers showcasing its unique and engaging gameplay. Among Us is an online multiplayer social deduction game where players are part of a spaceship crew, with most being crewmates tasked with completing various tasks around the ship. However, one or more players secretly play as imposters, whose main goal is to sabotage the ship and eliminate the crewmates without being identified. The game revolves around the tension of identifying the imposters through crew meetings where players discuss suspicious activities and vote on whom they believe the imposters are based on the evidence presented. Among Us is celebrated for its simple yet deep gameplay that encourages communication, deceit, and strategy, making it a favorite at social gatherings and among online communities. And we did an episode back on it and the social deduction genre back in episode 146. So go and check that out if you'd like to learn.
We did. Didn't we? We learned all about Mafia and that whole genres. It was a college game, wasn't it? Mafia? Way back in like the 80s or
Yes.
90s, long time ago.
I mean, yeah, probably back then, but, still played in college. Oh, I guess it's out in the electronic game, though.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, like, where
Yeah.
Mafia itself came from. Fun. Fun. Neil Druckmann was born in Tel Aviv, Israel in December of 1978. As we sadly know from current news, violence is frequently a reality for people who live in that part of the Middle East. To keep him distracted from the constant conversations about violence and the reality that they lived in, Neil's older brother introduced him to comic books, movies, and most importantly, video games at a young age. He has said that his hours playing old Sierra and LucasArts games like Maniac Mansion and Space Quest helped him pick up the English language. In 1981, his family moved to Miami, so Druckmann went to middle school and high school in Florida. After high school, he went to Florida State University as a criminology major, hoping to become an FBI agent to gain experience and later become a thriller novelist later in life. So he wanted to write, do some time in the FBI, and then retire and write books about what he learned.
Neat idea.
Right? At some point, he ended up as a graphics research assistant in FSU's visualization lab. He realized there that he wanted to be an animator, but that required signing up for art classes, which his parents would not let him do under any circumstances. So instead, he took a programming class, which was related, and he realized that his preference was programming anyways. So that was an acceptable thing to do because programming's not art, right? So he switched to a bachelor's of computer science, and he got his bachelor's in 2003. Afterwards, he attended Carnegie Mellon to get a master's in entertainment technology. Around this same time, one of his professors paid for him to attend the GDC Game Developers Conference in 2003, where he attended a presentation given by a man named Jason Rubin. Now, Rubin had met a fellow named Andy Gavin way back in 1982. They met at a weekend Hebrew school in Virginia. And there they learned that they had a mutual interest in computers. They frequently hung out talking about programming and game development and game piracy during class when they should have been doing class things, you know? And this bloomed into a friendship. So in 1984, they teamed up with another friend, Mike Goyer, and they founded a company called Jam Software. Jam being the first letter in Jason, Andy, and Mike.
Ah, smart.
right? But they soon realized that Mike Goyer was uninterested in making games. So they bought back his share in the company, which at the time was $100. And Jam became known as Jason and Andy's Magic.
Nice, that's great.
I know, fantastic. Their first game was a game called Math Jam. They wrote it for the Apple II. After that, they decided that they wanted to create a skiing game. During production of said skiing game, Andy accidentally copied bootleg games over their only working copy of the game they were working
Oh,
on. So they had to start from
jeepers.
scratch, and they recreated the entire game with some improvements, albeit over a single weekend. That
Oh,
game was
damn.
that game was called Ski Crazed. They sold it to a publisher called Baldville for I think like $250 or something like that, and it sold a little more than 1,000 copies. A few years later, in 1989, Jam Software was renamed to Naughty Dog. The first title ever developed by Naughty Dog was a role playing game called Keef the Thief. They followed that up with their first console game, a Sega Genesis title named Rings of Power, then a fighting game called Way of the Warrior. Now, you might know Naughty Dog's next title. We are doing a whole episode on it in September, which is kind of why I'm zooming through a lot of it because we're going to revisit it back then. It's a little unknown title, little weird guy. You may know him, Rob. His name is Crash Bandicoot.
No.
No, no, no. Crash Bandicoot. Don't know Crash.
No familiarity there, Dave.
I know. So Naughty Dog, uh, even though nobody knows Crash Bandicoot, they kept making them for whatever reason. And eventually, this led to them making another series called the Jax series in 2001. And so it was in 2003 that Neil Druckmann went to the GDC to see a presentation given by Andy Gavin of Naughty Dog. Afterwards, Neil Druckmann bugged Gavin and gave him his business card. After a little while, Andy Gavin reached back out to Druckmann, who had left an impression on him, and he told them that there was an intern position available. It was the first time that Naughty Dog had offered intern positions. Um, but by the time Druckmann made up his mind and applied for the position, it had already been filled. Then, later on, it came time for Druckmann himself to apply for intern positions for his own degree. And when this time came, he had reached out to Andy Gavin for advice, who promptly put him in touch with a game director at Naughty Dog named Evan Well. After meeting Evan and having interviews, Druckmann was offered an internship with Naughty Dog. So he joined Naughty Dog as a programming intern in May of 2004. His first job was to work on localization tools and gameplay programming for Jack 3. He managed to receive credit for his second year of his master's degree through his work at Naughty Dog, which in turn earned him his master's in 2005. By this point, though, he had already been offered a full time position with the company as a programmer, and was busy doing gameplay programming for Jax 3. There's a game after Jax 3 that he did, I think, localization stuff for. So he was a Naughty Dog employee. During the development of Jax 3 and Jax X, which was the next game, he expressed interest in joining the design team. If you'll recall, he had been designing games in the beginning. He had expressed a desire to be an animator in the visualization lab. He had wanted to be a writer when he went to school. The storytelling part is where his interest is. So he wanted to join the design side of things, right? And so he went to his higher ups, the bosses, and he said, "Hey, I want to join the design team." But they denied the transfer because he was a programmer and he didn't have any design experience whatsoever. But they made him a deal. They said, we will give you an opportunity. If you make designs in your own time, we will consider them. Right?
Okay, so work on your own time.
So work on your own time doing stuff we don't want to pay you for, and we'll take a look at them just to see if you've got it.
Makes sense, but I'm sure he did it.
He did. He came up with several level designs and turned them in. By the end of Jack's X, the company decided that maybe this kid does have some skills in game design, and they offered him a game design position for their next game, which was Jackson Dexter: The Final Frontier.
I mean, I guess he got what he wanted, but
He did get what he wanted, absolutely. Several months into the development of Jackson Dexter, he was transferred over to a team working on a new IP for Naughty Dog, which was called Uncharted. Uncharted, Drake's Fortune had run into some development trouble, so they pulled from other projects inside the studio to help out with the seeing the development on Uncharted through, which of course Uncharted was a success, and that led to a sequel, Uncharted 2, and Druckmann was on the team for Uncharted 2. So Uncharted 2 gets completed, and at that point, Naughty Dog decides that they're going to split themselves into two different development teams to work on two different projects. One of the teams went on to create Uncharted 3. The other team was going to work on a completely new project. Neil Druckmann was chosen to lead this new project because in his time on the design team in previous projects, he had gained a reputation for being a determined individual who had a talent for design. This new project was codenamed Project Thing.
Thing. Ooh.
Ooh. Well, Druckmann was a student at Carnegie Mellon. He was tasked with creating a video game concept to present to film director George A. Romero, who's famous for creating the Living Dead series. And what he pitched for that presentation was an idea in which they would merge the gameplay of Ico. We talked about Ico during our episode on Shadow of the Colossus, which is episode 164. So he wanted to merge the gameplay of Ico with a story set during a zombie apocalypse similar to Romero's own Night of the Living Dead, and a character with the likes of the girls from Sin City. The lead character in this story would be a police officer who would be tasked with protecting a young girl. However, due to the police officer's heart condition, players would also assume control of the young girl at times, reversing the roles in the game. Now,
Interesting.
this was not interesting, unfortunately, to the people he pitched it to. So that idea did not go anywhere. But Druckmann did not let it die, right? He took the idea and he pitched it as a 6-book comic series to an independent publisher. It was supposed to be called The Turning, and he finished its script, but they turned it down as well. So it sat for a long while. And then the basis of this concept resurfaced when the team was pitching ideas on what to do for Project Thing. Druckmann called this iteration of his concept Mankind. It was a scenario in which the infection could only spread, in which an infection could only spread to women. And then the story followed the journey of a man who was protecting the only immune woman to bring her to a lab to create a potential cure.
Hmm.
Now
Sounds like a lot of other movies and books and stuff.
that concept was shot down after female Naughty Dog employees expressed concerns about it being too misogynistic. Because, women and all.
Hot
It
take,
spread
Dave.
it spread to women. It spread to women. I don't have any problem with women. I love women. But he didn't let that story die either. And what the story became, our topic for today, The Last of Us, grew from these beginnings. he began to look at ways to expand on the narrative and create a story that could be accepted by everyone. He found inspiration in the 2002 American crime drama Road to Perdition, which follows a mob enforcer and his son as they seek vengeance against a mobster who murdered the rest of their family. Its narrative heavily surrounds the main character trying to protect his son from the same fate of violence that he suffers from.
As he
Druckmann,
seeks vengeance.
as he seeks vengeance, kind of, sort of, sure.
Okay.
So essentially, he wants to murder the people who murder his family, but he doesn't want his son swept up in it, which is kind of hard when you also have to protect your son.
Yeah, seems very counterintuitive.
It's, I mean, that's the beauty of the story. That's why it's great. That's what it fights with.
Fair enough.
Druckmann was further inspired by the BBC documentary Planet Earth, because who isn't inspired by Planet Earth?
You're
Thank you,
right, Dave. It's so inspiring.
thank you, David Attenborough. That documentary Planet Earth features the Cordyceps fungi, which infects insects, takes control of their motor functions, and then forces them to cultivate the fungus. And this evolved into an idea for Druckmann, in which the Cordyceps fungus evolved to affect humans, and it becomes the catalyst for an infection, an outbreak, if you will, in his story. In order to expand on this idea and make the scenario as realistic as possible, Druckmann and the team conducted extensive research into outbreaks. They drew inspiration from the polio epidemic in the 1880s. They looked at the Spanish flu pandemic in 1918. They wrote a fantastic story. We learned that it's all true when we had our pandemic in 2020. Do you see that? 1880, 1880 breaks it. 1918 is almost 1920, and then 100 years later, we had another one. We didn't learn from the first one.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy.
Essentially, what they did was they wrote a story about what would happen if the fungus spread to humans, how nature would then start to reclaim everything as civilization broke down, and how people and the environment changed around that, right? All the comforts of civilization would be gone. No internet, no phones, no electricity eventually, no toilets.
Mm, that's where you lose me.
And essentially, a lot of where they started was how would people respond to that? Now, as the story began to take form, they knew from the very beginning that they wanted the game to feature two lead characters, two protagonists. They each had their own strong individual story arcs. The characters they came up with, Joel and Ellie, represent the two eras that are shown in the game. The older gentleman, Joel, represents the world before the outbreak, having lived most of his life before it, right? While the younger girl, Ellie, represents the post-pandemic world, having been born after the pandemic. I know things you. So let me stop there before I keep going. Have you played The Last of Us?
I have not played it. I have seen some gameplay as my roommate in college played through it, so I am somewhat familiar with it. It's not like I don't know anything about it. I have seen the gameplay, seen going from one character to the other. I definitely can remember vividly how the game begins, and I'm pretty sure I remember how it ends. But I might be thinking of two, possibly. I don't know, but I know enough.
Did you watch the show?
I have not watched the show. I wanted to give the games a play myself before I did that. Just, I don't know. It's just kind of the way I think. And, you know, I bring it up many times, but no PlayStation.
Oh, valid point. Joel was originally written, taken inspiration from Josh Brolin's character in No Country for Old Men. The writers saw that character as someone who was very quiet, very cool under pressure. So that's where they started. But as they continued to write the character, and especially as his voice actor Troy Baker began to breathe life into their dialogue, Joel evolved into a more emotional person. In the end, his story became the narrative that many, many people relate to in this game, which is an exploration on how far a father is willing to go to save a child. Now, the character of Ellie is interesting. Ellie came about actually during a planning session for Uncharted 2, way back when. While they were designing Uncharted 2, someone had an idea for a mute character, someone who can't speak. And this mute character would summon the player to follow them, and it would, you know, create what they saw as, quote, a beautiful relationship through gameplay alone. So think like Journey, because we played Journey and talked about it on this podcast. Think Journey, where it's all done through gestures and the what's happening, the action itself.
Right.
Now, that idea was never used in Uncharted, but that idea was brought back up while they were discussing early plans for Project Thing, and that discussion inevitably led to Ellie. Now, as they began to flesh Ellie's character out, where they drew inspiration from was, at the time, there were wars in Syria and Afghanistan. And just like it is now for the children in Palestine and Israel, violence, war is conflict is a daily reality for children in those countries. And so they saw Ellie as being a child that came from the same place, right? A lifestyle for a child that would grow up amongst the conflict of a post-apocalyptic world. And as they began to flesh these out, there are many, many themes that they found, and they just kept using throughout the design of this game. When writing dialogue, the rule of thumb was to keep it short and natural. If it didn't sound right, it was rewritten. If the voice actors didn't like it or they didn't get it, it was rewritten. One of the major themes that presents itself throughout the game is life goes on. There's a scene towards the end of the game, really famous scene in the game, famous scene in the TV series too, where Joel and Ellie discover a herd of giraffes. It's a really touching, poignant moment that comes after a lot of horrible things. And that scene is kind of like the ultimate representation of that concept, right? They've come a long way. There's all these horrible things they've seen and done, for that matter, and then they get to stop, and there's a herd of giraffes that just are walking past them without a care in the world, right?
Right.
They're in the middle of all this crappy stuff, and the rest of the world is just living life. Now, I've talked about that scene before. Heck, I talked about it the other day when someone was asking me what we were doing for this week. There are scenes in video games throughout my history of my gameplay that always stick out with me. I've often talked about wow moments, like I think I've brought up a few times when you exit the vault in Fallout 3 and the wasteland is just in front of you and you get to see the vastness of it. That was a wow moment for me. This giraffe scene is another one of my wow moments. I love it. I think it does everything that it's supposed to do. It's just it's a beautiful moment in the midst of everything, and I think it's a fantastic representation of life goes on. So it's definitely one of my wow moments. So the team continues to write this narrative, and as they're writing this narrative and trying to put the pieces together, the team on the programming and the design, not the design, but the technical side, they have to put the pieces together too, right? All of the all of the actors' performances are motion capture. 95% of everything in the game was done through motion capture, I believe, is the percentage. So they had to work through that technology. They pretty much had to create new game engines to be able to accomplish everything that they wanted to do technically, because they just didn't have it yet. One of the areas of particular interest that they focused on was the AI, or artificial intelligence, that's in the game, which makes a lot of sense, right? When you put all this effort into your characters and their relationship on the narrative side, you can't throw that in the midst of crappy AI, right? So Ellie is a side character, and you do play her at certain points, spoiler alert, but often she follows, right? And if her AI sucked, it would make players dislike her or be irritated by her on the merit of her AI being awful. And that would have a serious effect on what players thought of her and would likely minimize the emotional impact of her scenes throughout the game.
Looking at you, Resident Evil.
Right? 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 So there was a lot of time and consideration put into her AI, her pathing, things like that, because they needed it to just be an afterthought. They needed it just to work so the story and the narrative could do its thing, you know? And then one of the other things that's particularly special about this is the enemy AI. The enemy AI was actually developed to make random choices. They want it to be realistic. The enemy is actually designed to study its surroundings and then to develop tactics specifically to attack the player in the environment, position, so on and so forth that it's currently in. It's really intuitive. And I've heard people talk about the difficulty of the enemies. That's something that gets talked about when they talk about this game. And that is done, part and part with the fact that they wrote all this AI, this fantastic AI around it. So, um, really, the whole process, everything that I read, everything that I researched about the development of Last of Us is that it was a really great process, extremely collaborative. Teams worked with one another, they took inspiration from one another. There was give and take between designers, the programmers, the actors, and so on and so forth. I talked about how if lines didn't work with the voice actors, they were rewritten by the design team. So there was some give and take there. And then of course that would have to trickle down to the animators and the programmers and so on and so forth. So the programmers had to design a special like AI, not an AI system, an animation system. So the motion capture could capture the detail and the facial expressions. They actually wrote a muscular system. Uh, they wrote a muscular system. I don't know any other way to put it. That's the end of that one. So, um, they all worked together to create this game. By this point, the team at Naughty Dog had a lot of experience making great video games. They had a history, Crash Bandicoot and Jax, and then the Uncharted series. They had a history of making fantastic games, and even though this was Neil Druckmann's first time at the helm, he had years of experience within all these successful teams that he brought to the table, and it made the development of The Last of Us, just for all purposes, a fantastic and successful process, which showed because what this team put out is one of the most immersive games of its generation. Rob, do you know what's almost as immersive as playing The Last of Us?
What's that, Dave?
Creating your own podcast and sharing your passion with the world. Have you, fellow listeners, ever considered making your own podcast? If you have something fascinating and engaging to share, but you just don't know where to start, our friends at Zencaster have got you covered.
With Zencaster, it's super easy to record a podcast. Everyone logs in using their web browser, and you just start recording a high quality podcast right away. You can even record up to 4K video with your guests, and with Zencaster's multi-layered backups, you always have the highest quality recordings, even if your connection is unstable.
And with Zencaster, you never have to worry about how you sound. Its post-production process makes you sound fantastic, all buttery smooth. It automatically removes all those filler words, no ums, no ahs, gets rid of awkward pauses. You can set the right podcast loudness. You can get rid of background noise. Just a bunch of menu options. I want this. Click, 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 click. Okay, produce. When it's done doing all the work it needs to do, it sends you an email that says, hey, your file is ready. You go back, you click on it, you download your file, and you can do whatever you want with it. It's fantastic.
And even if the thought of podcasting overwhelms you because you think you need all these different tools and services, relax. With Zencaster's all in one podcasting platform, you can do all of that crazy stuff that Dave just mentioned and distribute it to major destinations like Spotify and Apple, all just from Zencaster.
Just from Zencaster. So if you'd like to start your own podcast, or maybe you want to take your current podcast to the next level, we've got a deal for you. Go to zencaster.com/pricing and use our offer code MemoryCardLane, all one word, and you can get 30% off the first month of any Zencaster paid plan.
Sign up for Zencaster today, and you can experience the same ease in producing your own high quality podcast as we do each week. Go out and share your ideas with the world.
Yeah, share those ideas like the team at Naughty Dog shared The Last of Us. Well, Rob, I don't know what else I can really say about The Last of Us, specifically about how it turned out. It's pretty much cited as one of the greatest games of its generation, which was originally the PlayStation 3 era. Um, then the PlayStation 4 comes out and they remaster it for the platform, and bam, it becomes one of the best games of that generation, like the example. Then we get the PS5 and they remake the game entirely. By now, it has a sequel, The Last of Us 2, and they incorporate a lot of fun stuff that they learned from making two of them to improve the first game in terms of graphics and gameplay. And bam, one of the best games of its generation. Uh, it's frequently, to be honest, considered in every conversation of one of the best video games ever made. You know what they didn't change, though, throughout all that?
What's that?
The story, which is
Oh.
pretty much why I focused on how that came together. There's a lot. You can hop online and read a lot about the development. There's more stuff about the music design and the art design and the programming, the technical aspect. But I think that the beauty of this game is always going to be the story and the narrative. You know, Druckmann has a lot to do with that, which is why I talked about him. He is a fantastic writer. He has won awards for writing, wrote the first game, wrote the second game, helped adapt it into a TV show. Heck, he even directed one of the episodes of the TV series. That man is intimately involved with this series and very much invested in how it's presented and where it's going to go from here, right?
I
Um,
definitely would say so.
so it's an important thing, and it shows. He's, like I said, he's won awards. He has won awards for what he's done. When you write a good story and you tell it in a manner that leaves your players completely immersed in it, it transcends everything else. Good stories also transcend their media, right? That's why we have great books that become great movies. In this case, we have a great video game that becomes a great TV series. Um, when they transferred The Last of Us to an HBO series, it follows the story very closely. It uses the extra time it has to expand on some of the pieces and relationships here and there. And I mean, it's honestly also considered one of the greatest video game adaptations of all time. So everything that they're doing with The Last of Us and the story and the narrative and everything is just it's just great, you know. And honestly, we do a lot of stories here, but we don't see a lot of programmers that are Jewish American, you know, like Druckmann. So he's unique in that respect. Not that, you know, um, you know, gives a lot of support for that and what's going on there. So obviously, Naughty Dog still going strong. Uncharted, big deal. Now there's an Uncharted movie. There are 4+ Uncharted games. That series is good. We haven't seen Crash Bandicoot in a while. That's a shame, huh?
It sure is.
Man. And of course, The Last of Us got a sequel and is a TV series. So, you know, Naughty Dog is going strong. Druckmann is now head of the studio. So his career path has obviously gone in the right direction.
A little bit.
Little bit. Started as
Just a wee bit.
started as a little programming intern in 2004, and 20 years later, it might be 19 years later because I think it was 2003, they announced that he was studio head and head of creative, co-president, I think it's co-president and head of creative for Naughty Dog Studio.
It's something.
It's something, you know. He's doing okay for himself. He loves this franchise. He loves to tell its story. He loves to tell you where the story came from. Everything that I've read or seen on Druckmann, he's just a fantastic person that wants to contribute, you know, in all the best ways to the world, to the industry, and yeah, he may not be a thriller novelist like he planned, but he is telling fantastic stories. I would argue probably more impactful stories than he would have if he had gone down the path as a thrilling novelist. It's a thriller novelist, but I want to say thrilling novelist. He kind of is that. Um, and it's just, I don't know. It's a good thing. It's a good thing, Rob.
Indeed, it is, Dave.
And it's kind of fun to think about, like, here's this little kid who was born in Israel and went to school in Miami and just, you know, used to distract himself from the daily violence of where he lived with basically video games that also taught him English, you know?
Yeah,
Uh,
I mean, it's crazy to think what you can learn from video games
and
and
then
what you
we're
can do when you put your mind to it.
right. And then he kind of has this path where he gets to hear, which is it's a cool story, to be honest with you. Not exactly a straight path, but it's a cool story nonetheless. And I feel like Druckmann has made the best of it for sure, and I'm glad for it because I am in the party of, I think that these are easily some of the best video games of their generation. The Last of Us is one of my favorite games. I played it when it first came out. I played it as a remaster on the PS4 era. I have not yet adapted to PS5, so I have not played the remake. But I probably will at some point. Well, they did the remake on Windows, so I can't even say that. So now I can't use that as an excuse because I can pick it up on Windows when I'm ready to play that. So,
Yeah,
um,
that's true.
but fantastic stories. You should play them. They're not easy. If you're looking for a happy-go-lucky, feel-good narrative, this is not the game for you. It is raw. It is brutal. It deals with very, very triggering topics, if that's the word you want to use. That's what the hip kids use these days, isn't it?
Sure, Dave.
Got that drip. I don't even know what
Okay.
I don't even know what I just said. I'm old. Um, so very raw, very real game, and the second one takes, I think, the same concepts and ratchets them up a little. Second one was just as good, if not better, of a story, and also fantastic. I enjoyed both of them very, very much. So, I genuinely hope there is more left to the story. To the story, Druckmann has said he thinks that he has one more chapter left to tell, but as of right now, there is nothing on the horizon. So who knows? But I'm glad for what we have, and I think that if you have an opportunity, this is one of those games that, like, if there was a 50 games you have to play before you die type of list, this would definitely be on mine, for sure. So, Rob, what are you waiting for?
I guess at this point,
PlayStation?
just
I guess a PlayStation?
yeah, I'll just go out and buy one real quick, I guess.
Yeah.
Hey, why don't you just let me borrow yours? Ship it.
Yeah, sure. I can do that. I'll send it back home. Anyway, that's The Last of Us. There's a whole lot more to learn on it if you want, but only so much time for us. So we focus on the story today and Druckmann's career. So a lot of other things that we talked about. Like I said, later this year, we're going to be doing an episode on Crash Bandicoot. You can, of course, find a calendar of upcoming episodes if you want to see about other things that we're going to do episodes on our website, which is www.memorycardlane.com. And Rob, I looked forward, so this is going to be a little different, but what else can people find on our website? Old
Well,
episodes.
you can find old episodes on our website. You can find a calendar of our upcoming episodes. You can find a link to our Discord. You can find a link to our Patreon. And you can find a link to our social medias. I am on platforms as Rob_O_Raptor and Dave.
I can be found on various platforms as David_is_wrong. David is wrong because that's what I am all the time.
Yarp.
I acknowledge what I am openly. Each week, we're going to tell you one story relevant to the current week in gaming history. It can be about a game, it can be about what the game took from the world as its inspiration, it can be about what the game gave back to the world in its legacy. Sometimes it's about a person and what they did, sometimes it's about technology, but inspirations, legacy, and topics. That's what we do. Each week when we sit down to tell you each story, we sit down, we do research, and we learn new things. That's my favorite part about doing this week in, week out is every time I sit down, I look for things that I didn't know. And when I find something I didn't know, I get excited. And then I, in turn, write that into an episode to teach other people about things I didn't know. It's a fantastic cycle. And in recognition of it, we like to talk about our own takeaways each week. So, Rob, what did you learn today?
Well, Dave, I think that I obviously learned all about this game as far as the production side of things, but I think that my biggest takeaway from today is that Druckmann was a programmer, and on his time, he made his own level designs, and they were good enough to get him into game design. And it's just that show that just because you're somewhere now doesn't mean you can't put in extra effort to get to where you want to be. And it's we hear that all the time, that these people put in all this extra effort and things, and it turns out well. And it's just it's always one of those things that are kind of empowering or inspiring. And
Very,
it's just
very
amazing to
true.
know that someone who grew up with such a difficult childhood with everything that he was facing in his country, just it now leads as a game design for a pretty successful studio.
Very true. And it's, you think about things like that, and his life could have gone either way, right? Like so many other people who've not been granted the opportunities he has, sadly, for various reasons.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Let's see. I didn't really ever consider where this game came from, if that makes sense. Like, that's part of the fun for me, was learning the basis of the narrative, learning how they pulled ideas from. I mean, for one, if I'm gonna pick one thing, the fact that he got the idea from Planet Earth just tickles my fancy. So I
That
think
is
I'm a,
pretty fantastic. I
yeah,
had
yeah,
that was a
yeah,
pretty close second for me.
yeah. I'm gonna stick with that. I'm gonna go with Planet Earth inspiring The Last of Us. So all right, well, I think We're rounding about the hour mark, so Rob, that's a good place to call it for today. Before I take it out of here and look into next week, is there anything that you would like to add to today's episode?
Well, as always, I want to take one quick moment to say thank you so much to all of our listeners. We definitely hope that this is not the last of us that you're going to hear.
No. I see what you did there. That was good. Well played.
Thank you, sir.
Well, fellow survivors, that wraps up our journey through the post-apocalyptic world of The Last of Us. We hope you enjoyed diving into the depths of this narrative masterpiece, and discovering the innovative gameplay mechanics that set it apart from other games of its generation. As always, it's been a pleasure sharing my love of this game with you. Next week, though, we're switching gears from the emotional landscapes of a pandemic ridden world to the gritty, crime ridden streets of Detroit. So we're going home. That's right. Next week, we're going to talk about Robocop and the many video game adaptations that have been inspired by this iconic cyborg law enforcer. We'll take a look at how Robocop was created, and we'll talk about how it transitioned from the silver screen to video game consoles at home. So gear up for some high octane action, and join us again next week as we find out if Robocop ever had to reboot after catching too many criminals, as we take another trip down memory card lane. Do the thing.
Do a ba ba da ba da ba 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 da ba.